In 1873, a New York beekeeper added a bellows mechanism to a metal fire chamber and produced the tool beekeeping still uses today. The design was not intended to make fire. It was intended to keep the material inside burning slowly, without open flame, and to cool the smoke on its way out before it ever reached the bees. 2 jobs, not 1. In the century-and-a-half since, the tool itself has barely changed. The same cylinder, the same perforated grate, the same conical lid and nozzle. But the way we load it has changed considerably. Most smokers in use today are only doing the first of those 2 jobs. They are packed with a single fast-burning material, lit, and sending hot smoke and the occasional spark straight down onto the top bars. In this video, I want to walk through what that tool was designed to do, what actually happens inside the chamber when it is loaded wrong, and why almost every beekeeper goes wrong in the same place without ever suspecting the smoker is the problem. Here is what makes this so easy to miss. A smoker that is loaded badly still produces smoke. It lights, it puffs, it makes the visible white cloud that every beekeeper associates with a calm inspection. And from the outside, it looks exactly like a smoker that is working correctly. There is no warning light, no obvious failure, nothing that announces a problem. So when the bees come up hot on a day the smoker was running poorly, the explanation reaches for something else entirely. The weather, the queen's temperament, the time of day, a nectar dearth. The one variable that was actually different that morning is the one sitting in the beekeeper's own hand, and it is almost never the suspect. If this biology first breakdown is useful to you, a like helps more beekeepers find it. There is also nothing in the standard beekeeping education that suggests the smoker is worth thinking about beyond getting it lit. It is presented as a starting condition rather than a variable. You light the smoker, then you begin beekeeping. And a tool framed that way does not get examined when something goes wrong later. Before any mechanism, here is something you can do at your own hives this week that takes about 3 seconds and will tell you more than any amount of reading. Before you approach the colony, hold the back of your bare hand about a foot from the smoker nozzle and give it a puff. That is roughly the distance the smoke travels before it reaches bees on the top bars. If the smoke feels cool or barely warm on your skin, the smoker is doing its job. If it stings, if you flinch, if you find yourself pulling your hand back, that is the smoke your bees are receiving, directly onto their bodies, at close range. Most beekeepers have never once tested this, and the first time they do, it changes how they load the thing permanently. I want to be careful not to overstate what this tells you. There is no published temperature standard for smoke at the nozzle, no number to check against, and the test is a rough one. But rough is enough here, because the difference between a well-loaded smoker and a badly loaded one at that distance is not subtle. It is the difference between something you can hold your hand in comfortably and something you cannot. Before we go further, one small and genuine request. If this is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps. It signals that careful, historically grounded beekeeping is worth showing to more people. In the comments, I would honestly like to know, what do you load your smoker with, and have you ever tested the temperature of the smoke coming out of it? And if you would like to support the work more directly, joining the channel is a little like buying us a coffee. No grand promises, just a way to help keep these breakdowns coming. That is all. Now, back to the bees, and to what smoke is actually doing inside the colony. To understand why temperature matters so much, you have to be clear about what smoke actually accomplishes, because it is narrower than most beekeepers assume. When a guard bee stings or perceives a threat, she releases an alarm pheromone. Isopentyl acetate is the principal component, and that chemical signal recruits other bees to the defense. It spreads through the colony in seconds and turns a handful of alert guards into a coordinated response. Smoke interferes with that signal. The particles and volatile compounds in smoke swamp the bee's ability to detect the alarm chemistry, and without a clear signal to follow, the recruitment cascade does not build. That is the primary effect, and it is a chemical one. The smoke is not sedating the bees, not poisoning them, not putting them to sleep. It is interrupting a conversation. That distinction matters for everything that follows. If smoke sedated bees, more of it and stronger would logically be better, and its temperature would be secondary. Because it works by interfering with a chemical signal, the useful quantity is the one that masks the signal. Anything beyond that is not additional benefit. It is additional insult delivered to an animal that has already stopped receiving the message it was reacting to. And this is exactly where heat becomes the problem, because heat is not neutral in that conversation. A colony treats sudden heat at close range as a threat in its own right. It is the signature of fire, which is the one thing a nest of wax in a hollow tree genuinely cannot survive. Hot smoke arriving on the top bars does interrupt the alarm chemistry, but it simultaneously introduces a new alarm of its own. Bees exposed to it move away from it abruptly, break cluster, and run across the frames rather than settling. At higher temperatures, the smoke can singe hairs and wings outright, and a smoker that is flaming inside rather than smoldering will throw sparks and hot ash down between the frames. The beekeeper sees bees moving off the top bars and reads it as the smoke working. Some of what is being seen is bees getting away from something that is hurting them. There is a further problem with a chamber running hot enough to flame, and it is counterintuitive. A smoker that is genuinely burning does not produce dense white smoke at all. It produces thin, sharp, nearly transparent smoke, because efficient combustion consumes the very particulate matter that makes smoke effective. The hot smoker delivers a weaker masking effect and a stronger heat insult at the same time. The two failures compound rather than trading off. That is the reversal at the center of this whole subject. Cool smoke and hot smoke are not two grades of the same tool, one merely better than the other. They produce opposite results. Cool smoke masks the alarm signal and the colony settles. Hot smoke masks the alarm signal and then supplies a fresh reason for alarm. So the net effect can be a colony that is more agitated after smoking than before. The beekeeper is doing the right thing with the wrong output. And because the visible white cloud looks identical in both cases, there is nothing in the moment that tells them which one they just delivered. The visible cloud is what everyone judges by, and the visible cloud is the least informative thing about it. So the question becomes, what actually determines the temperature at the nozzle? And the answer is not the brand of the smoker, or how hard you work the bellows. It is what is inside it and how it is arranged. Every fuel has a burn character, how readily it ignites, whether it flames or smolders, how hot it runs, and how long it lasts. A material that lights instantly and burns with visible flame is a material that produces hot smoke and burns out fast. A material that resists ignition and smolders without flame produces cooler smoke and lasts far longer. Neither category is good or bad on its own. The mistake is not choosing the wrong material. The mistake is filling the smoker with only one of them. That single distinction, starter materials versus sustainer materials, is what the entire rest of this comes down to, and it is not a matter of preference or region or tradition. It is a property of the materials themselves, and it means a correct load has to contain more than one kind. The first layer, at the bottom, is the starter, and its entire job is to catch fire easily and get the chamber going. Dry pine needles do this superbly. So does crumpled corrugated cardboard. Dry grass, wood shavings, a twist of paper all work. These materials are frequently criticized as smoker fuels, and the criticism has a basis. Pine needles burn with open flame, run hot, and their resin gums up the inside of a smoker over time, while cardboard burns hot and fast and is gone in minutes. But that is only a fair criticism if you are using them as the whole load, which is precisely the error. As a starter layer, occupying the bottom quarter of the chamber, both are excellent, and the fact that they burn out quickly matters very little because by the time they do, they have already done their job. There is one practical caution with pine needles worth mentioning even in the starter roll. Their resin does accumulate inside the chamber and around the nozzle over a season, and a smoker used heavily with needles needs cleaning more often than one that is not. That is a maintenance cost, not a reason to avoid them, but it is the kind of thing nobody mentions until your nozzle is half blocked and you cannot work out why the airflow has gone. Walk into any patch of woodland and find a log that has been on the ground for 4 or 5 years. One you can push a boot through. Break it open and the inside is pale, dry, fibrous, and light enough that a full armload weighs almost nothing. That material is the second layer, and it is the layer most beekeepers skip entirely. Its job is the opposite of the starters. It should resist flame, burn slowly without igniting, and produce dense smoke for a long time. Punky wood of that kind is the classic material and is still hard to beat. Compressed cotton fiber sold as smoker fuel does the same job very cleanly. Untreated burlap, hardwood shavings, and wood pellets all work well. What these materials share is density and a resistance to open flame. They do not catch quickly, which is exactly why they need the starter beneath them, and they release their smoke slowly, which is why a properly loaded smoker stays lit for an hour instead of dying after 15 minutes. Gathered on a dry day and kept in a covered bucket, a single armload of punky wood lasts most of a season. It was the standard for generations, for the straightforward reason that it was lying on the ground everywhere, and it worked better than anything that could be bought. The third layer is the one almost nobody uses, and the one that does the most for the bees. On top of everything else goes a handful of green material. Fresh grass, green leaves, a few weeds pulled from beside the hive stand. It is not fuel. It is not meant to burn. Its purpose is to sit in the smoke path and cool the smoke as it passes through, and to physically catch sparks and hot ash before they can leave the nozzle. Green material contains water, and that water absorbs heat as the smoke passes over it. The smoke that exits a smoker with a green top layer is measurably cooler and visibly cleaner than the same smoke from the same fuel without it. This is the single cheapest improvement available to any beekeeper. It costs nothing, it takes 4 seconds, and it is missing from most smokers in the field. There is a reason this layer is skipped so consistently, and it is not laziness. It is that the green material does not look like fuel and does not feel like part of the load, so it reads as an optional flourish rather than a functional component. It is the opposite. It is the only part of the load that is specifically working on behalf of the bees rather than on behalf of the fire. Here is where most beekeepers who hear about layering still get it wrong, and the error is a specific one. They add the layers but pack them loosely, or they pack them so tightly that air cannot move through the column at all. Both fail in opposite directions. A loose load gets too much oxygen, flames rather than smolders, burns through in minutes, and runs hot, which is the exact condition layering was meant to prevent. A load compressed hard enough to choke the airflow will suffocate itself and go out, usually about 4 minutes after you have walked to the far end of the apiary. The target is firm but breathing, pressed down enough to hold together and to slow the burn, loose enough that a slow squeeze of the bellows moves air up through the whole column. That texture is learned by hand rather than by description, and it takes a few tries. For a reference point, it is close to the resistance of firmly packed soil in a pot. It holds its shape when pressed, but you would not call it hard. And there is a diagnostic hiding in this that is worth naming plainly, because nearly every beekeeper has lived it without ever identifying the cause. If your smoker reliably goes out around the same point in the yard, 3 hives in, 10 minutes along, at roughly the same place every time, that is not bad luck, and it is not a defective smoker. It is a loading signature. A smoker that dies early and consistently is almost always packed too tightly at the base, or built entirely of starter material with no sustaining body above it. And the timing of its failure is a fairly precise report on which of the two it is. Then there is the category of material that should never go into a smoker at all. And this one is not a matter of preference. Anything treated, painted, printed, coated, pressure-treated, glued with synthetic adhesive, or made of synthetic fiber is off the list. Burning those materials releases compounds that neither the bees nor the beekeeper should be breathing, and some of them will settle into wax and stay there. This is where the ordinary caution about cardboard is genuinely warranted. Plain corrugated cardboard is fine, but the printed panels, the glossy coated surfaces, the packing tape, and the wax-treated boxes are not. Strip them off, or use a different starter. The same applies to burlap, which is often chemically treated in commercial sacking, and to any wood that might have been pressure-treated. If you are unsure what is in a material, the answer is to not put it in the smoker. None of this is exotic caution. It is the same standard that applies to anything you would be unwilling to breathe yourself for 20 minutes at close range, which is a reasonable rough test when you are unsure about a material and standing in your own apiary holding it. The historical smokers were loaded the way I have just described, and not because anyone had studied combustion temperature. They were loaded that way because the beekeepers who used them all day, every day, through a working season, discovered by attrition what stayed lit and what did not. A smoker that goes out in the middle of an apiary is a genuine problem when there are 40 more colonies to open and no lighter in your pocket. The layered load survived because it burned for an hour. The cooling top layer survived because throwing sparks into a hive full of dry wax is a mistake a beekeeper makes exactly once. What looks like traditional technique was, in most cases, simply the arrangement that failed least often in daily use over a long career. I find this a more persuasive argument for the method than any appeal to tradition would be. These were not people preserving a technique out of sentiment. They were people who would have abandoned it instantly if something easier had worked as well. And the fact that the layered load persisted across generations of hard commercial use is the strongest available evidence that it earns its extra minute. There is a further consequence of a badly loaded smoker that shows up nowhere in the moment and is easy to miss entirely. A smoker that runs hot and burns out fast has to be relit and refilled repeatedly through an inspection, and each of those interruptions extends the time the colony is open. A hive that takes 40 minutes to work because the smoker keeps dying is a hive that has been chilled longer, disrupted longer, and given far more opportunity to organize a defense than one worked in 15. The cost of the loading mistake is not only the temperature of the smoke, it is the length of the entire inspection and everything that follows from a colony being open twice as long as it needed to be. This is the compounding cost that makes the loading discipline worth more than it first appears. 1 minute spent on the load returns time on every colony worked that day, and the return is largest on the days when the inspection is already difficult. It is worth being precise about when this actually shows up, because a beekeeper who has only ever worked gentle bees on good days may reasonably wonder what the fuss is about. A calm colony in a strong flow tolerates a badly loaded smoker without much complaint. The margin for error is wide, and the fault stays hidden. The fault reveals itself under a specific set of conditions, and they are worth knowing as a diagnostic list. A defensive colony, an overcast or windy day, a late-season inspection during a dearth, a hive that has been robbed or disturbed within the past few days, or any colony that has already been opened once that week. In those situations, the colony is starting from a lower threshold, and the smoke has to work rather than merely be present. If your difficult inspections cluster into that list, the smoker is worth checking before the genetics are blamed. There is also a real limit to what smoke can do at all, and overstating it does nobody any favors. Smoke does not fix a queenless colony, a colony under robbing pressure, or a colony that is genetically defensive. It does not compensate for banging equipment, standing in the flight path, or working a hive in cold, wet weather when it should have been left closed. A perfectly loaded smoker in the hands of someone who slams a box down is worse than an indifferent smoker in the hands of someone who moves slowly and deliberately. The loading matters, but it sits underneath everything else about how a colony is handled, and it will not rescue an inspection that was going to go badly for other reasons. Smoke is a tool for managing a specific chemical signal in a specific window of time. It is not a general-purpose solution to a colony that does not want to be opened, and treating it as one leads to the beekeeper standing over an angry hive pumping more and more smoke into it, which at that point is making things actively worse. The reason careful loading faded from ordinary practice is not mysterious, and it is the same shape as most of these stories. Fuel became something you buy in a bag rather than something you gather and arrange, and a bag of uniform pellets implies, without ever saying so, that loading is a solved problem. Pour it in, light it, done. There is nothing wrong with pellets. They smolder well, and they are genuinely convenient. But they arrived alongside the quiet loss of the idea that a smoker load has an architecture, that the bottom of the chamber and the top of the chamber are doing different jobs, and that the last handful you put in matters as much as the first. The knowledge did not fail. It simply stopped being necessary to think about, and so it stopped being passed on. The pattern is not unique to smoker fuel. When a task becomes a product, the understanding behind the task tends to leave with it, not because anyone suppressed it, but because a product that works well enough removes the daily pressure that kept the knowledge alive. What I do now takes about a minute and has not changed in a long time. A small handful of dry needles or torn plain cardboard goes in the bottom and gets lit properly, with the bellows worked until it is genuinely burning rather than barely catching. Then the body of the load, punky wood or cotton or shavings, goes in on top of that flame in stages, pressed down firmly as it goes, worked with the bellows between each addition until the whole column is smoldering and producing thick smoke rather than thin wisps. Then, a good handful of green grass on top, pressed down, and the lid closed. Then, before I walk to the first hive, the back of my hand at a foot from the nozzle and one puff. If it stings, the load comes apart and I start over, because a smoker that is wrong at the first hive will be wrong at all of them. The whole sequence sounds more elaborate written out than it is in practice. Starter, body, green top, one test puff. After a season, it is automatic, and the minute it costs is returned several times over on the first difficult colony of the day. The thing worth carrying out of all of this has less to do with smokers than with the general habit of blaming bees for outcomes the beekeeper produced. When a colony comes up hot, the available explanations are almost all about the bees, their genetics, their mood, their queen, the season. Those explanations are sometimes correct, but they are also the comfortable ones, because they locate the cause somewhere outside the beekeeper's control and therefore outside their responsibility. The smoker is the clearest case of a variable that is entirely within the beekeeper's control, entirely invisible in its failure mode, and almost never suspected. Checking it costs 3 seconds and 1 puff against the back of your hand. None of this means the bees are never the reason. Colonies do have genuinely difficult genetics, bad days, and legitimate reasons to defend themselves. But a beekeeper who has never checked the smoker cannot honestly rule it out, and ruling it out takes less effort than any of the alternative explanations require. That tool has not changed in 150 years, and it does not need to. The design was right the first time. Contain a slow smolder, and cool what comes out of it before it reaches the bees. Everything in this video is just a description of how to load it so it does the second half of that job, which is the half most of us quietly stopped doing. Have you ever had a colony come up unexpectedly hot and blamed the bees, only to wonder later about the smoke? Or tested your own nozzle temperature and been surprised by what you found? Leave your experience in the comments. Subscribe for more historically grounded beekeeping, and if you want the full breakdown of smoker technique itself, how much smoke, where to place it, and the timing window after the first puff, that one is next.